From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey, everybody, Rob Cairns here. I'm the founder, CEO, and Chief Digital Strategist of Stunning Digital Marketing. In today's podcast, I have my good friend, Mr. Joe Casabona, with me, and we're going to talk all about podcasting. If you're a podcaster or interested in podcasting, this is one episode you do not want to miss. Sit back, relax, grab a drink, enjoy the show. Hey, everybody. Stunning Digital Marketing is your digital concierge. We help you put the pieces together to make your marketing success. Specialties we have including WordPress design and development, WordPress security, which is one of our most popular offerings, ads, and more. So if you want to succeed in the digital world, go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and have a look at what we offer, and we'd be glad to help you. And let's jump on a call and make it happening. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Hey, everybody, Rob Cairns here today. And today I have my good friend, Mr. Joe Casabona, and we're going to talk the world of podcasting. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. How are you?
No, I'm doing good. It's such a pleasure. I was saying to you on X when we booked this, you and I haven't talked in a long time. Usually we're talking about baseball and fighting on X or some social media platform because that's what we do. We're both passionate about sports.
Yeah.
You know that. And you've been busy.
Yes.
I've been busy.
Yes.
And there's lots going on. So one of the questions I never asked you, and I think we'll start to show up with asking is, you're originally in the WordPress space, and I don't want to get into all the drama that's going on. It's just not worth it. And you transitioned into the podcasting space. How did that happen, and how did your love of podcasting start?
Yeah, well, I've always been a bit of an entertainer. I used to a story I recently shared in a speech I gave to the school, to my kids' school, because I'm president of the Home and School Association, was that I used to put my school sweater over my head and make people call me Sister Josephine when I was in second grade. I went to a Catholic school. And I shared that story because my second grade teacher noticed that I liked attention, I enjoyed entertaining, and she encouraged me to join drama club. And so one of the reasons I love podcasting is because it gives me this opportunity now that I'm no longer in school to provide some sort of entertainment and have these conversations with people I wouldn't normally have conversations with and create engaging content. And aside from that, being a solopreneur who works from home can be a pretty lonely existence. And podcasting was a way for me to connect with people when I didn't have the water cooler to speak to people around.
Yeah. When I say the best part about the podcasting journey is the people you meet, like I get to hang out with people like you. And that's like, I look at the people I've had on my show and the people you've had on your shows over the years, and it's those people that kind of make the space, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've grown my network. You mentioned that you're approaching 500. I am also approaching, I'll hit it sometime next year. But I've got to speak to hundreds of people about just business and how they live their lives, and it's really fun and engaging. And it's a really, as an extrovert, I love it.
Yeah, I'm like you. I'm an extrovert on a scale 1 to 10 on 100. You know what I mean? Off the scale. So
Yeah.
there you go. Yeah. I think that's why
Yeah.
we get along so well, actually. In between the sports
Yeah.
squabbling, of course.
Yes. Well, that's, I don't, there, it seems like there's not a lot of sports people in the tech space for some reason.
I get it.
And so it's nice to come across, people who are as into baseball as I am.
Yeah. One of the things you and I were talking about before we went to record, and it's worth mentioning, and I always say this to clients, I say this to friends. I'm going to start a podcast. And I said, okay, are you prepared to invest the time? Because you and I both know, having both done this a long time, you longer than me, it's a big time investment to podcast. And everything from editing to prepping to doing a pre-record call if you don't know the guest well, and so on. What would you say your average time, and I know you do editing more and you have a bit of a team, is to put together a podcast right now, Joe?
Yeah, this is a great question because before I put my systems in place, I was probably spending um a 4 or 5 to 1 ratio on time I put into the podcast versus length of the episode, which means
Mhm.
if the episode's an hour, I was probably putting in 5, maybe 6 hours per
Yep.
episode. Um, and that doesn't include editing. Editing was one of the first things I hired out because I hated it. So if you're also editing, right, maybe you're looking at a full work day per episode, right? Because you're right, especially if you're doing interviews, you gotta vet, you gotta schedule, you gotta come up with good questions. I've had guests go on 12-minute tangents where I'm like,
Yep.
all right, well, we gotta stop this. We gotta edit this out. Um, Today, I probably spend about 15 to 20 minutes in guest prep because I do have a VA who does the initial research. And I'm on a platform called Podmatch, which does a better job of pairing me with potential guests. But I'm also doing fewer interviews and I'm doing more solo episodes.
Mhm.
Um, so it's probably about 15, 20 minutes, I'll say per week, guest prep, like guest research. And then planning the episode, I probably spend about a half hour to 40 minutes planning each episode, doing the 3 act story, coming
Yep.
up with good questions. If it's a solo episode, writing out, I do like what's the big problem, what's the small fix, and what's the feedback. Um, and then recording again for guests, it's probably I carve out 90 minutes. It
Mhm.
isn't usually 90 minutes. Um, but I do carve out 90 minutes for that. It's probably an hour.
Yep.
And for solo episodes, I try to keep those less than 20 minutes. Um, Solo episodes, because I do so much planning on the front end, I don't really need to edit those. Um, and then with interviews, I record the intro. That probably takes about another half hour, right? So I'll do the summary. I have been using AI to help me with that.
Yep.
But I'll do the summary, I'll record the intro, and I'll send that off to my editor. And then from there, I don't see it anymore. So for an interview, it's uh maybe 2 hours, right, per episode, inclusive of recording, I would say. Um, and yeah, it's been a game changer. Like my process has saved me about 12 hours per week
I would
because I
agree.
don't have to do all the other stuff.
And even if you do all the other stuff, having a process down, it's going to save you time. Like I know when I started, I used to sit here every episode, I had a checklist and I just tick off the boxes. Now I don't even bother. I look at it occasionally, but
Mhm.
I mean, when you get into like 400 odd episodes and you know this, it becomes a routine and you just do it. So that kind of helps. Um, in your journey, have you had episodes where you've actually recorded and then said, geez, I'm not going to air this because you didn't like what was said, you didn't like how it was said, you didn't like where it went? Have you actually done that, Joe?
Uh, I should have, but I don't think I've ever done that. There have been a couple of times where I've canceled the recording on short notice because, here's the most recent example is someone pitched me about how solopreneurs can build trust.
Okay.
And I thought this is a really good topic, right? This is hard
Yep.
and we used to rely on social media and I don't think we can anymore. And so I invited this person onto the show and then immediately after they booked, I got an email from their welcome sequence,
Oh no.
which means that they took my email address and subscribed me to their mailing list. And I thought, this is the number one way to not build trust. So I immediately reached out to them and I said, you know what? We're going to cancel this. This is not a good fit.
Yep.
Um, And so there was that. I got on a call with one guy and he was sitting in his living room, like with like just an undershirt on.
Yep.
He said he didn't have headphones, which is crazy because everyone has headphones. Um, and I just said, look, you agreed to like use a good microphone, be in a good recording spot, and have headphones when you filled out my form, and you didn't do any of this, so we're not going to record. And he was flabbergasted.
Yep.
He's like, nobody else says it's an issue. And I said, those people were too nice. It's an issue. And
Yep.
so, so I've done that, but there were probably a couple of interviews I could have not released.
Yeah.
Um and
And we're
I would yeah.
sorry, and we're all flexible to a point, right? I mean, as I said to you today, I'm not in my usual recording spot because I have a house full of people, and
Yeah.
which means I don't have my normal mic. I don't have my normal lighting, but I value you and your time so much. I do have a headset, and it's not optimal, but it sounds fine. The point is, make yourself look and hear professional, and that's the key,
Mhm.
as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done remote recordings where I'm either at my parents' house or
Yeah.
I booked Marie Poulin and I was really excited to have her on the show. She was a pretty big name and I was just getting into Notion. She does runs Notion Mastery for those who don't know. Um, and I know that she didn't accept a lot of interviews. And so it was like it was really great that she accepted my show. I forgot to block the week that she booked off because we were on vacation.
Oh no.
And
Done
so
that.
I thought, we go to the beach and I have very low tolerance for spending a lot of time on the beach. And so I thought, you know what? This is fine. She booked in the afternoon. The kids will be napping. Erin and her parents will be down on the beach. Um, and so I brought my recording stuff
Yep.
and I set up shop there, and this was before I was doing video, so I just really need to make sure I sounded good. But um yeah, I was flexible in that instance because Marie took time out of her schedule.
Mhm,
I knew if we were going to reschedule, I might not get the interview. And I
mhm.
had I had the portable recording set up. So I was happy to do that.
I've done recordings on client trips out of a Chicago hotel room. We've done them everywhere, I'm sure. And you just gave me my next segue and you beat me to the punch before you did video. And I want to go there because, as far as I'm concerned, you have to do video even if it's two people talking. What's your philosophy on video now?
Yeah, I made a post about this. I'm probably going to write an article for Podcast Advent about it. But I think that video is crucial now. Edison Research, which, some of their, with any statistics, you can question the methodology, but they found that a large portion of adults listen to, I will say listen to or discover. I'll soften their statement a little bit. Because they say just like the majority of American adults listen to podcasts on Spotify. Um, I'm sorry, on YouTube. Um, I'm gonna soften it a little bit and say like a large portion of people discover or listen to podcasts on YouTube. If you dive deeper and look at Gen Z, almost half of them feel they have a stronger connection with the host if they have YouTube,
Yeah.
if they have video. And so I no longer think that video is optional. I know that we're all worried about YouTube being a closed ecosystem and eating podcast lunch and taking it over, but I love RSS. I love the open format. I'm an evangelist for RSS.com. Um, but there's no discovery engine with open RSS, and there is with YouTube. And so I think that don't just put your podcast on YouTube, make sure it's everywhere, but video is crucial now
Yeah.
because YouTube has decided they want to be in podcasting. And so I think it's important for podcasters to be on YouTube.
No, I agree with you. YouTube made that decision almost a year ago, and if you watch what's happening, we don't have the Google Podcast Player. I'm an Android guy. You're not. You're an Apple guy, if I recall, still. And I'm not.
That is
I'm not
correct.
picking. I don't like Mac versus PC fights. I never have.
Yep.
Because I started on an Apple, by the way, years ago. I'm dating myself. I have an Apple II in storage, so. But
Nice.
the point I'm making is YouTube's been headed there for a long time, and I think video. The other thing I like doing video is you and I are talking, and I can see your reactions to questions and answers, even from a host perspective. I think it's really important. Like you and I can gauge how we're feeling, and the feelings really come out in video, and I think that's really important. Um, so
Yeah,
go,
there are
go ahead.
podcasters I like and respect who are ardently against seeing the person they're talking to
Yep.
because they feel that if you make a visual joke, it takes away from the audio. But
No.
I think I think video is so important because we are having a conversation and we
Mhm.
should be able to feed off of each other. And as long as we're not like, as long as I don't reference something on your screen that's impossible to explain to the listener, I don't think it degrades the experience.
Yeah,
And so,
I would
yeah.
I would agree with it. Having a conversation. There's another pet peeve of mine, and you and I are doing great. So not you. Have you ever had guests come to you and say, "I want the 10 questions or the 15 questions ahead of time"? Because I know when they do that to me, I say, "You're not the guest for me." I'll give them usually the lead question. I'll often ask and say, "Is there something you're working on that you really want to get out there?" I don't have a problem doing that, but I'm not going to give them the questions because I like a conversation. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I'll give the diplomatic answer here.
More than me.
I I do think that sending the questions ahead of time is it depends on the show.
Okay.
My show, I want it to be focused. I want there to be clear takeaways.
Yep.
I think that fewer and fewer people listen just for casual conversations.
I agree.
And so I I'm not opposed to sending the questions ahead of time. I do
Okay.
make it clear that I'm not just going to read the questions in order. Like we are going to have a conversation.
Okay.
Um, but I think that if the guest wants to be as prepared as possible, um, that's something that I'm happy to accommodate for them.
Okay. I can see that. Your podcast stack, what hardware and software are you using these days? Because it changes,
Yeah,
and I know from following you on X, your office changes all the time too. Because I do follow those
I
pictures.
yes, my office changes frequently,
Yeah.
always optimizing. However, my recording stack, the Shure SM7B, this is probably 5 years old at this point, maybe six. And I cannot imagine a situation where I would change this. It's the best microphone for me, certainly,
I agree.
and there's no reason. If someone gifts me a Telefunken microphone, which is a $1,500 microphone, I'd happily use it, but I won't be buying myself a new microphone.
Yeah.
Now the arm that this is on, I finally changed that. I used to have the Rode PS1,
Hmm.
and I got the Elgato Wave arm because it's more flexible,
Yeah.
and it's out of the way and it doesn't creak as much. And then I'm using the Rodecaster Pro 2, which I like because I like to try a bunch of different microphones and things like that. It's probably overkill for what most people need.
Yeah.
Um, Video setup has not changed since February 2020, except for I have the Elgato prompter now. So I move the recording software I use onto that, and I can make eye contact with my guest, which makes for better video.
Hmm.
But I'm still using the A6400 by Sony, and the Sigma F16 fixed lens, which has appreciated in value, which is wild.
Yeah, it has. It's crazy. And what I would
Yeah.
say to you is I've used a Shure mic. That's what I usually record with if I'm in my normal spot. And I got one because of you like a number of years ago. And I would say that is still the best value for the money out there every day, all day.
Yeah, absolutely. And like as we record this, but often throughout the year, they'll run $100 off sale. So you can get the Shure SM7B for $350 US.
Yeah.
Um, whereas like the one I'll usually recommend to people who are just starting is the Shure MV7 if they're willing to spend more than $100.
Mhm.
Um, and I did a video comparing the two. Um, but if you're willing to spend a little extra, the Shure SM7B I think can't be beat.
Yeah. Yeah. When you were doing editing, and you're not anymore, what software did you use for editing?
Yeah, this is a great question. I didn't really touch on any of the software, right? I answered the hardware question.
Hmm.
Um, so when I was doing editing, I was using Audacity and then
Yeah.
GarageBand.
Huh.
Um, Today when I will do light editing, usually like light touch editing. I'm using Logic Pro
Okay.
and I have these plugins by Isotope RX for mouth declicking and breath control. And this is not to say that I try to edit out every breath, but like big breaths in between, the distracting breaths.
Yeah.
And the same thing with mouth clicking, right? I don't know what it is. Like lip smacking really bothers me. There's a guy on Talking Giants who just like lip smacks and they don't edit that and it grates on me. And so I can remove that with the press of a button in Logic Pro.
Yeah.
Um, and then as far as I'll still do my own video editing because it's mostly controlled by Ecamm Live. But I'll move that into ScreenFlow. I'm just really comfortable there.
Yeah.
And it's really easy for me to with my Stream Deck kind of churn through the edits really quick.
Yeah. What I would say to people is, and you know this, is get comfortable with your tools, decide what you're going to use, and don't play the shiny tool syndrome. I need to change tomorrow or the next day. It's just not worth it. Get your processes down, work hard on streamlining your processes. And if you can automate any of it, which you are an expert in, automate it and do it now. Because if you have to do three tasks in one day, I mean the number of podcasters that still manually book their guests, I just cringe at. Give them a link. Let them go book it yourself. Find something. Make your life easy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as far as tools, like yeah, I shared a story last year about how I was trying to use Descript for video editing.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Remember?
it's very appealing to highlight text and then edit video. And there was something that I had to do for RSS.com for our end of the year video. And the fact that I decided for that one, for whatever reason, to record and edit in ScreenFlow, like meant that I didn't have to reshoot the entire 20-minute video.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's just like it's probably I'm more comfortable with ScreenFlow, but ScreenFlow is something I've used for a long time. And so, yeah, don't switch from tool to tool because it looks interesting or it's the golden ticket to saving you a bunch of time. Consider the time the opportunity cost or the learning curve, right? When you switch. If you're comfortable with your tools, use those tools, right? Um, and yeah, as far as automating goes, if there's something, I have a framework for this that if we have time we can get into, but if
Sure.
there's something that is a task that you need to repeat that has the same, it's always going to have the same inputs, it's always going to have the same result. I would strongly recommend looking into automating that because it's one less thing that you need to remember to do.
Mhm. And that's not just with podcasting. That's with all aspects of your business. And I would say find if you got to touch something a couple of times in a day, just find a way to automate it because you'll save time in the long run. So let's jump into the industry a little bit. The podcast industry's changed. Independent podcasts seem to be having a harder time these days with the independent production house. I think of places like Twit.tv's been whining for the last year about how revenue is down. That's Leo Laporte's outfit. They expanded greatly and they've cut back. And then you got the massive podcasts houses like Wonderly, and Wonderly is just growing by the day, which is owned by Amazon. What do you think of what's going on in the industry?
Yeah, I think it's tough because when you get into these big companies that are putting a ton of money into podcasting, Wondery, Spotify,
Yeah.
Amazon, New York Times, right? Like they
Hmm.
have a ton of podcasts.
BBC. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, it is in general good for the industry because people are like companies are seeing it's worth the investment. It's
Mhm.
worth creating the content. And so like there you could take a rising tide lifts all ships
Mhm.
approach. But when you look at independent podcasters, right? And they see, well, I don't have Joe Rogan money, and so I'm not going to be able to have the same reach. I think that mindset needs to change, right? I think that if you look at your podcast as a TV show, yeah, you're going to need to get on a network and get in front of a bunch of people. But if you look at it as putting out genuinely helpful content and as a way to connect with a niche audience, a target audience, there's I don't think there's anything better, right? No one says there's too many books. No one says there's too many blogs. No one says there's too many songs or too many movies.
That's true.
And I think that it's the same for podcasts. There are books for different people, there are podcasts for different people. And so if you can figure out how to get in front of the people you're trying to talk to, I think that your podcast will have a bright future, even if you're not getting, Joe Rogan or Call Her Daddy or the daily numbers.
Yeah. And you and I are both in the podcasting space, kind of in the techie space. You tend to podcast about podcasting. I tend to do interviews like this or talk about the tech space or the productivity space just for fun. What do you listen to when you're not podcasting? If you do.
So is it what podcasts do I
Yeah,
listen to or what do I listen
exactly.
to in general?
Both.
All right. So I love music. So if I'm not listening to or podcast, if I'm not listening to podcasts or podcasting, I have music on. I've started listening to Christmas music early.
Yeah,
So
so
I'm sorry. Yeah. Um, but I love music, and so I will often be listening to that. When I am listening to podcasts, I do like techie podcasts, right? So I listen to Upgrade, which is a techie podcast,
yeah.
Connected, which is a techie podcast. But I also listen to the boys at John Boy Media, right? They're Yankee centric and baseball centric podcasts.
Yeah.
Uh, Cortex is probably my favorite podcast, which is about just kind of productivity and workflows in general.
Hmm.
And I am, you know what? I just realized this. Um, the app I use, Overcast, recently rolled out a stats feature so I can tell you my top 10 podcasts.
Oh, oh,
Let's
cool.
see. They are so by listening time is what this is. Uh, um, Talking Yanks, so
Yeah.
a John Boy Media podcast. Upgrade, Advisory Opinions, which is a basically a legal podcast about the Supreme Court and federal court cases.
Oh, God.
Uh, the Bull, yeah, I'm like I wish I was a lawyer sometimes. Um, the Bulwark podcast, which is a kind of they can't even be called right of center anymore, but they started off as a right of center kind of anti a particular political person
Mhm.
outfit. I've stopped listening to them post election. Um, Talking Baseball, Serious Trouble, which is another legal podcast, the Dispatch podcast, and Cortex. And the only reason that Cortex is so low on that list is because they publish monthly, and the other podcasts I just mentioned publish at least once a week, sometimes twice a week.
That's interesting because I kind of look at what I listen to, and then my number one podcast is a sports podcast called The Bob McCown Show. He's a sportscaster in Canada that's well known. And then after that, it's a couple business shows and a mental health show. So it's interesting. Your genre and my genre are kind of a little different, but that's not
Yeah.
surprising.
About 2 years ago, I decided that I was going to stop reading business books and listening to business podcasts because it felt like wasted time for me. The
Yeah.
advice wasn't, the advice was either like rote or uh advice that everybody gives, or it's just advice that's not for someone at my station in life right now. Um and so I decided to swap that out for more entertaining podcasts, lots of sports podcasts this year. I don't know what happened there. I was like,
Yes.
yeah.
I'm sure.
So I
The only
probably
thing you're
wanted to
miss
fill the void.
the only thing you're missing is a Taylor Swift podcast, and that would combine the music and the sports, and you'd be there, right?
I know, you'd think that I'd listen to like Song Exploder or something.
Yeah.
I did listen to, it was a limited run podcast. It was called McCartney, A Life in Lyrics. And it was incredible. I learned a ton from that show about Paul McCartney's approach, because it was a guy who wrote a book about Paul McCartney. And so he basically took his interview tapes and turned it into a podcast, and they dove deep on some song he wrote. I learned that um his song Picasso's Last Words, uh he wrote because Dustin Hoffman said, I heard you could write a song about anything. And he held up a newspaper that was talking about how um, Picasso died the night before. And he just wrote a song on the spot about it. It's absolute madness. Paul McCartney is something else, but
Yeah,
I
well,
love that podcast.
he is just an incredible human being, and to be doing what he's doing at his age. I saw him in concert years ago, um, here in Toronto when Rogers Center was called Skydome. So that's how far ago.
Yes.
And
Okay.
his wife Linda was still alive. His late life Linda, who played with him. So that tells you how long. I think I saw him in like 89, 90, somewhere around
Okay.
there. So yeah. My one regret is never seeing the Beatles as a group in concert. I've seen pretty well the who's who of everything since the 70s, but they're kind of the void that's missing out of my concert repertoire. So there you go.
Nice.
Yeah. As we kind of wrap up, do you have like 5 or 6 really good tips for somebody running a podcast that they can do right off the top and make their life easy?
Yeah, I would say eliminate anything you don't personally need to do, right? So this is and I say anything, start with one or two things, right? Because that sounds overwhelming, but
Yes.
editing, publishing your podcast, right? My VA publishes my podcast, and I have a pretty complicated publishing process. So um as long as you give the step by steps, uh another person will be able to handle that. I would say moving I didn't ask when this episode is coming out, but I assume it's going to be right before or right after the new year. So
Before,
um
but you're right.
okay, great.
Yep.
Great. So as you go into the new year, I won't say the exact year just in case someone listens to it a year from now. Consider doing more solo episodes. I think that um a lot of people listen to learn something, and you're establishing yourself as an authority, and solo episodes keep the spotlight on you, and they're a lot easier to produce.
Yeah.
Um, if you're thinking about adding video, remember that in most cases, lighting is more important than the most expensive camera. So get a good light, and it will do wonders. And then let's see, that was three. So I'll do one more. Um, I would say do everything you can to get feedback from your listeners.
Mhm.
This is hard, but it's another reason to be on YouTube, because engagement is rewarded there, and there are built-in comments and likes. And so, have a call to action saying, what did you think? What questions do you have? Try to encourage your listeners to engage because that's going to give you an idea of what content is the most popular. Oh, you know what? And number 5, bonus. Look at your analytics on Spotify and Apple
Yeah.
Podcasts. Your hosting analytics are great, but they can't tell you completion rates. Spotify and Apple Podcasts can tell you completion rates, and that's also going to give you some clues as to what your audience is most interested in.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say around analytics is when you first start, don't get hung up on the analytics. I didn't start looking at analytics till I was like 15 episodes in because we all know your first 2 or 3 or 4 episodes are really get going episodes, and I don't think it's worth looking at them. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. Don't live and die by your downloads, right?
Yep.
Downloads are one thing, engagement is another. And so prioritize getting people on your mailing list or getting people to write into you because that's such a better signal of the health of your show, right?
Yes.
Um, it's like if you are, uh, let's say you're playing an instrument on a street corner and you have a tip bucket out, right? You could say, "Oh, yeah, I did it like right off of Times Square and probably 5,000 people walked by me that day." Right? And I would say, "How much money did you make?" And if it's $0, it doesn't matter how many people walked by you, right?
Yep. Yep.
So,
I agree.
yeah.
If somebody wants to find out about your podcast, which I would tell them go subscribe to now because we've talked about that. You know how I feel. The work you do, the automation side, your coaching, where's the best place to go, Joe?
Yeah, Casabona.org. You're gonna find links to my podcast. It's called The Streamlined Solopreneur. Um, and then you'll also be able to go on my mailing list and get my automations database. So if you're wondering, hey, what can I automate? How can I improve my processes? I've got 40 ideas for you waiting when you fill out the form on that page.
Yeah. And you have a new private podcast as well, a kind of a notes one that you've been playing around with, right?
Yeah, Joe's audio notes, which is over at casabona.org/notes. Yeah, it's a free private podcast. And I'm toying around with that as a way to build my mailing list. And it was slow going in the beginning, but now it's really starting to pick up. I think in part because now I'm on a social network that doesn't punish you for posting links. Um, but
Always fun.
yeah, yes. Um, but I also did release like a preview episode on Streamline Solopreneur for it. So, yeah, that's been really fun, and I think that I'm gonna continue doing that in 2025. It's just a way for me to, I have like a little portable microphone,
Yeah.
that it's turned on, that I plug into my phone and I record. I try to do 7 minutes or less, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been pretty well received as well.
Yeah, well, you putting that out made me thinking of other ideas. So there you go. You tend to
Nice.
do that to me, so I appreciate that. Joe, as
Awesome.
always, we got to do this again soon, but thanks for your time. Much appreciated. And I hope you have a wonderful day and take care of you and your family.
My pleasure, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to the STM Show. The STM Show is brought to you by Stunning Digital Marketing, your digital concierge. For all your digital marketing needs, especially WordPress security, jump on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and let's help you put the pieces together and make your business succeed in the marketing realm. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com.
Very special thank you to Joe Casabona for joining me on this edition of the STM Show.
This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I love you. I miss you very much. And thanks for all the inspiration over the years and your caring, your understanding, and helping me grow as an individual. Thank you, Dad.